exploring how we can master ourselves by looking at how authors and experts say it is possible, with your host, Shashiti Basu.
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 89 of How to Be, with me, Shashiti, as your Tibet presenter, guiding you through life's tricky topics and skills by reading through the best books out there. Many of us are afraid of conflict. We don't like others to be angry with us or critical of us. We therefore avoid saying no when we are afraid that it will put us into conflict with someone else, whether that someone is an intimate partner, a colleague or friend, or a supervisor or boss. Many of us also try to avoid battles with our children because we feel that if we say no to them, they'll stop loving us. And the same goes for parents. After all, we are social animals and it can feel like a threat to the dynamic. But how do we say no to people? Here are Amanda Craven, an accredited and licensed clinical hypnotherapist, life coach, psychologist and author, Dr. Lisa Turner, who is a trauma expert and founder of CETfreedom, as well as Daniela Wolfe, founder and CEO at Bestie Life, helping you find the bliss in your day, on their thoughts.
As a clinical hypnotherapist who helps entrepreneurs overcome the after effects of childhood trauma, I see day after day the impact this trauma has on the ability of my clients to have healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries are important because they demonstrate our sense of self and especially our sense of self-worth. Being able to say no to the demands and requests of others means, firstly, we acknowledge our own needs, and secondly, we are able to say yes to ourselves. It is totally possible to reverse a history of people-pleasing or unhealthy boundaries. You can start in a small way by just delaying saying yes in the moment. For example, by replying, "Thanks for asking, I'll get back to you," and giving yourself time to make a choice that's right for you. Many people, though, may need to work through the origins of poor boundaries with a therapist before they're truly able to respect their own needs.
Without boundaries, we end up being overcommitted, overwhelmed, and we're unable to meet our own needs. And this then creates resentment and strains the relationships with those we love. Boundaries are like fences. They protect our emotional and physical and mental well-being. Just like you wouldn't let random strangers wander into your home, we need boundaries with the people in our lives. Sometimes we end up saying yes so that others won't be angry or hurt or upset. But really, what you're doing is you're actually just taking on their negative emotion and you're taking it on for yourself. Learning to say no can be unbelievably empowering, and it actually helps us be more authentic and respectful in relationships, including that with ourselves. So take the time to reflect on what are your boundaries and communicate them clearly. It's so much easier to say no ahead of time rather than retrospectively explain why you've got so grumpy with someone when you said yes, when you really wanted to say no. Remember, saying no is an important part of setting boundaries and taking care of yourself.
Boundaries, unfortunately, can get a bad rap as being mean or unaccommodating, but I believe that by saying no and setting boundaries around our time and our tasks, we are actually giving freedom and kindness to ourselves and those around us. Setting boundaries is so important for maintaining healthy relationships and protecting your own well-being. Some of the reasons to have some boundaries include establishing respect, because when you communicate your boundaries clearly, others are more likely to respect them and treat you accordingly. It helps you maintain healthy relationships because you and others know what to expect and what is acceptable behavior as far as when to contact you, how to reach out to you. It helps reduce your stress because you don't constantly feel overwhelmed or resentful of others tapping into your time, and it protects your overall well-being.
Our first book is from Natalie Lue, who is the author of the hugely popular relationship and self-esteem blog Baggage Reclaim, along with at least 5 books including Mr. Unavailable and The Fallback Girl. She also hosts the Baggage Reclaim Sessions podcast, which has over 3 million downloads. For nearly 2 decades, she's shared the journey of her transition from toxic relationships to love, care, trust, and respect. Her work has been mentioned and featured in the likes of the New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, BBC, the Sunday Times Magazine, and USA Today. We're talking about her new book, The Joy of Saying No, a simple plan to stop people-pleasing, reclaim your boundaries, and say yes to the life you want. It was great speaking with her, hence here's a snippet of our chat. But find the full interview on www.howtobe247.com or on the YouTube channel.
I think it's because we are socialized and conditioned to believe that no is a dirty word, and also that being honest, even though we're, for instance, told not to lie and how honesty is important, we also receive conflicting messages that actually saying how we truly feel about something, saying what we need or want, upsets people. It can inconvenience them. We can look like we're rude or difficult or selfish, and we don't want to be perceived that way. In the book, I talk about how if you're not a child right now, then you grew up during the age of obedience, which is where the disciplining, communicating, and interacting with children centered on making children as excessively compliant with authorities. So it was all about, being really, really obedient. And what that's actually taught us to do is to have some very distorted and conflicting messages about what being good means, what being bad means. But also, when you're taught to be compliant, that's not consciously consenting. And it's difficult, it's impossible to be just compliant and also consider your needs, desires, expectations, feelings, and opinions at the same time. So we were taught to be disconnected from our bodies. We were taught it was like, it's more important to obey an authority than it is to recognize my feelings or my thoughts or what's going on in my body. And that's why we're where we're at today. As humans, we are rather primal and primitive human beings despite, our evolution. So that part of our brain that handles fear, the amygdala, is still very primitive and is sort of primed to protect us from what it thinks is danger. And so I think that these messages that we've received, this conditioning that we have gone through, has ended up creating the sense that yes means belonging and safety and security, and, we can advance ourselves because, of course, humans are all about meeting their needs. And so conversely, we see no as a threat. So we see no as a threat to our safety and security. We think that it's going to invite conflict, criticism, disappointment, loss, rejection, additional stress. And I think that we have had experiences where people have said no to us, or where we've expressed our limits, or where something, we've maybe tried to express a boundary or who we are. And we have internalized some of those reactions as, that was a very bad thing. And the more that we have told ourselves that that is a very bad thing, it's really reinforced this deep sense of fear about no. And we then, with all of this conditioning that we have, we grow up and we go out into the world and we try to forge, our interpersonal relationships, and we repeat those patterns that we've already learned around pleasing. And then we go into the workplace. Well, we might go to, for instance, university first, but we will eventually most likely find ourselves in the workplace. And of course, when you think about how work environments have a boss and there are co-workers, that boss pushes our buttons about compliance. We start to get that sense of being obedient again. And also these co-workers probably remind us of our siblings or possibly even our parents, or they might remind us of like friends that we went to school with or bullies. And so there's so much sort of going on in there. And all of us are in some way trying to pursue a sense of this is what will make me be a good, happy, or successful person. And of course, then we don't want to do things that get in the way of that. And that's why we're afraid of saying no. Women have way less margin to say no. It's just how it is, because every single one of us on this planet is in a system of patriarchy. And that patriarchal system basically facilitates advancing the power of men. And it's not that men and boys don't receive messages around people pleasing. They do, but the messages that they receive are about facilitating the advancement of power. So it's like, be strong, buck up, don't show your emotions. And of course, those things are very problematic, but it's all about, actually, if you do those things, you're going to have more power. Whereas the messages that we receive as girls and then as women is be sweet, be meek, be mild, Don't, make waves, close your legs because that looks slutty. Make sure that you are doing all the right things so that you get picked and somebody wants to, settle down with you and marry you. Make sure you have kids. Women have to tick all of the boxes. Don't be too loud because that's going to scare people off. Ooh, that seems aggressive and angry because you spoke up there. So we have received these patriarchal, sexist, ageist, ableist, all the isms and the its messages that really send us message that, we need to comply so that we are safe and secure and so that we are chosen. And that is why we will struggle more with people pleasing, easily more so. When we experience burnout or other forms of stress-related illness, it's the equivalent of having run multiple red and amber traffic lights. And so it wasn't like there wasn't an issue before, and then suddenly it's like, boom, this thing has happened, and now it's burnout. We've been ignoring, dismissing, rationalizing ourselves into avoiding saying no. And it's almost like you're treading water, just trying to sort of keep up with this. And I think that part of the struggle of how we get there is we're, people pleasing and working in these ways is a very sort of automated or almost automatic habit. And, things that we have learned over time. And so we're often unconsciously responding to underlying tension and anxiety that's prompted by other people's expectations or people making requests or demands on our bandwidth, our time and our energy and our effort. And so the burnout becomes this massive watershed moment in our life that causes us to really reflect on, how did I get here?
Lue says she is a recovering people pleaser who had suppressed her needs, struggled with saying no, and as a result, felt guilty and anxious. In 2005, diagnosed with sarcoidosis, Lue learned to say no and prioritize herself. Overcoming people-pleasing, she embraced boundaries, leading to remission. Many struggle with people-pleasing due to societal conditioning. Instead of gaining approval, true self-care and asserting boundaries are crucial. The joy of saying no delves into the issue of people-pleasing and its impact on our lives. Whether overtly or indirectly, many struggle with saying no, acting nice out of fear, anger, or disappointment. The book highlights the power of saying no and its transformative effects. The author's personal journey from recovering from a life-threatening illness to improving relationships and finding joy serves as an inspiring example. Emphasizing the importance of setting boundaries, the book shares stories of healing trauma and overcoming challenges through the empowering act of saying no. If you find yourself relating to any of the following statements, you may be a people pleaser. People pleasers often feel resentful, overwhelmed, and anxious, putting others' needs ahead of their own. They struggle to say no, fear rejection, and seek approval from others. Despite doing good things, their motivations are driven by fear, guilt, or obligation, rather than authenticity. On the other hand, assertive individuals consider their well-being and set boundaries based on their values. Breaking free from people-pleasing involves recognizing these patterns and learning to say no when necessary. People-pleasing stems from childhood and involves passive response strategies to avoid pain and seek validation. However, it leads to low self-worth, anxiety, and resentment. The inability to say authentic yes, no, or maybe hinders fulfilling relationships and personal growth. Recognizing the signs of people-pleasing is crucial to break free from its hold. Emotional baggage affects everyone, but its impact depends on our willingness to address it. People-pleasing creates a mask that distances us from ourselves and others, hindering true intimacy. Despite seeking validation, it prevents others from seeing our authentic selves. Lue says our people-pleasing has blocked us from learning that without running the risk of conflict and criticism, by being honest about who we are through our yeses and nos, there is no intimacy. Instead, we normalize tiptoeing and walking on eggshells around our own and other people's agendas and good intentions and thinking that this is as good as it gets. People-pleasing misuses your good qualities and drains your resources, impacting your emotions, relationships, work, and overall fulfillment. It leads to hidden hurts, resentments, and a sense of disconnection. It can trigger flight, fight, freeze mode, exacerbating past traumas that fuel people-pleasing behavior. People-pleasing is an attempt to gain self-worth and fulfilling relationships without risking vulnerability. Understanding boundaries and learning to say yes and no authentically is crucial for intimacy, peace, and joy. Boundaries communicate who you are and what you value, solving problems and preventing repetition. Fear of saying no indicates issues with others' boundaries too. Healthy boundaries meet your needs and express your values. People-pleasing suppresses boundaries and authentic self-expression. Honoring boundaries reflects self-esteem and self-worth, leading to a more fulfilled and confident self. The age of obedience instilled fear and guilt in children to enforce compliance and obedience. This led to people-pleasing behavior as individuals sought to be good and avoid trouble. The rigid parenting style of that era suppressed individuality and emotional expression, emphasizing unconditional obedience to authority figures. As a result, many learned to prioritize others' needs over their own, hindering authentic self-expression and intimacy. Gendered messaging further influenced compliance behaviors. The fear of authority and emotional blackmail perpetuated guilt and self-inflicted pressure to comply. This kind of upbringing creates adults who distrust their feelings and struggle with asserting themselves, making them more prone to people-pleasing. Compliance, people-pleasing, and blind obedience to authority figures can also lead to chronic stress, disconnection from one's true self, and a toll on physical and mental health. The pressure to be a good person and belief in a meritocracy can lead to disillusionment and to burnout. Social media intensifies the pressure to compare and strive for unattainable expectations, leading to self-medication and compulsive behaviors. Emphasizing the importance of listening to one's body and emotions, the author calls for acknowledging and setting boundaries to avoid internal conflict and improve overall well-being. Our subconscious and early life experiences shape our habits, behaviors, and people-pleasing tendencies. These patterns are deeply ingrained but can be changed by understanding and updating our mental programming. The roles we play in childhood become part of our identity, but breaking these patterns is essential for personal growth and well-being. Learning to say no, setting boundaries, and being conscious of our intentions can help us reclaim our true selves and thrive as adults. There are various styles of people-pleasing, such as gooding, efforting, avoiding, saving, and suffering. It emphasizes that people often engage in these patterns without realizing it, and they are driven by hidden motivations and emotional baggage. Identifying one's dominant people-pleasing style helps understand underlying fears and desires, enabling individuals to break free from the patterns and prioritize their needs. Gooding is one of the styles of people-pleasing, characterized by the need to be perceived as good to gain self-worth and validation. It involves performing as a good person to influence and control others' feelings and behavior. Gooders often prioritize appearances and seek validation through conforming to rules and standards. The style originates from childhood experiences of being praised for being good, and it can lead to anxiety, self-doubt, and a lack of authenticity. Gooders may struggle to say no, fear disapproval, and maintain a superficial persona. Recognizing and addressing this style can help build healthier relationships and prioritize personal needs. Efforting is a form of people-pleasing where individuals seek self-worth and acceptance through constant effort, achievement, and perfectionism. The author talks about Angeline, a mid-40s woman who struggles with disappointment and anxiety in her dating life. Instead of stepping away from incompatible relationships, she doubles down on her efforts to make them work, deriving her value from her actions. Efforters often come from families that emphasized achievement or expected them to prove their worth. They fear disapproval and seek validation through their efforts, leading to burnout and unrealistic expectations. To overcome efforting, they should set realistic limits, prioritize self-care, and recognize their true worth beyond their achievements. Lue also discusses the people-pleasing style of avoiding. The story follows Marcus, who always felt different from his family, but avoided confronting his identity. Avoiders prioritize minimizing discomfort and fears, often avoiding conflict and emotional expression. This behavior typically arises from growing up in an environment where avoidance was encouraged, praised, or necessary for self-protection. Avoiders struggle to express feelings, avoid making decisions, and tend to play small to fit others' expectations. The author explores common themes and challenges faced by avoiders and provides tips for shifting away from this people-pleasing style. Saving is when the main focus is on individuals who constantly prioritize others' needs, seeking validation and worth through being needed and helpful. They are driven by the fear of rejection and abandonment, and often have a hidden agenda of trying to control others' feelings and actions through their assistance. The origins of this behavior may stem from childhood experiences of being praised for being selfless and helpful, or taking on adult responsibilities at a young age. It also highlights the common themes and challenges faced by savers, such as feeling burdened by others' problems, struggling with boundaries, and neglecting their own needs. Savers are encouraged to recognize their pattern of behavior and the underlying motivations behind it. True help and support should be given with boundaries and without expecting something in return. The author also warns against burnout and encourages the practice of saying no when necessary to avoid taking responsibility for others' problems. Suffering is a style of pleasing characterized by consciously and unconsciously putting oneself in distress to gain validation and control others' feelings and behavior. The primary motivation is the belief that suffering makes one worthy and secures a sense of self. This style often stems from an upbringing where suffering was normalized and attention was received for enduring pain. Sufferers struggle to say no, fearing rejection, and maintain a victim identity, seeking recognition through their suffering. Despite the pain, they hold on to the hope of being rescued. Setting boundaries is essential for their well-being, as suffering only perpetuates more harm. Recognizing their worth beyond suffering can help them break free from this pattern. Lue says the 6 steps for finding joy in saying no involves aligning with your authentic self, prioritizing your preferences over outdated programming, and embracing vulnerability. Saying no allows you to listen to your needs, desires, and feelings, leading to a more fulfilling life. It breaks the cycle of people-pleasing, setting realistic expectations, and taking small steps towards healthier boundaries. Journaling your progress helps acknowledge growth and develop self-awareness. The journey may feel uncomfortable, but will lead to healing and growth, ultimately finding joy in embracing your true self. In autumn 2014, the author's mother-in-law stayed with them during the Ebola epidemic in Sierra Leone, and it triggered feelings of unease and rage within the author. She realized that she had become overinvested in seeking approval and validation from others. To understand her people-pleasing habits better, she engaged in a 2-week experiment. During the first week, she gathered data on her daily activities, observing where she felt discomfort, what energized or drained her, and where she automatically said yes. In the second week, she challenged herself to say no, aiming to cut her yes responses in half. She provided sample scripts to say no without using the word no directly. The process helped Lue gain insights into her people-pleasing tendencies and the anxiety that underpinned them. By setting healthier boundaries and becoming more intentional with her yes and no responses, she aimed to reclaim her true self and break free from the people-pleasing pattern. The author acknowledged that this was a journey and urged readers not to rush the process, but to practice self-awareness and discernment. Finally, she addressed common troubleshooting questions, offering guidance for overcoming challenges associated with people-pleasing. This means recognizing your emotional baggage and understanding its influence on your thoughts, feelings, and actions is crucial for developing healthy boundaries and evolving into a more authentic version of yourself. By uncovering the motivations behind your responses and reactions, you gain the power to choose how you react to situations, rather than being driven by automatic patterns. Emotional baggage stems from past experiences and learned behaviors, often from childhood. The baggage can affect how you perceive and interact with others, leading to people-pleasing behaviors, fear of rejection, and difficulty setting boundaries. It's essential to confront this baggage and explore its roots to move forward with healthy responses. By asking questions about the origins of your emotional baggage, you can access information from your subconscious and nervous system. This process allows you to evaluate your behaviors and decide whether they align with the present and the person you want to become. Additionally, recognizing that everyone has their emotional baggage helps you understand and empathize with others, breaking the cycle of taking things personally and reacting defensively. Developing healthier boundaries involves learning to say no and taking responsibility for your actions and feelings. It's not about blaming others, but about understanding your part in a situation and how you can respond in a more assertive and boundaried way. Avoiding addressing emotional baggage can lead to mental, emotional, and even physical health issues. Just as we declutter our physical possessions, we need to unpack and process our emotional baggage to achieve emotional peace and well-being. Implementing healthy boundaries doesn't mean alienating others. Rather, it strengthens relationships by fostering mutual respect and understanding. Boundaries are about recognizing and respecting your needs, expectations, and feelings while also considering those of others. Ultimately, embracing healthier boundaries allows you to heal, grow, and evolve in your relationships and life, leading to a more authentic and fulfilling existence. Lue says to discover the power of reparenting yourself and healing your inner child to overcome people-pleasing patterns. By acknowledging the baggage behind your responses, you can embrace healthy boundaries, compassion, and self-care. Reconnect with your inner child, nurture them, and empower yourself to transform old narratives and behaviors. Slow down, pause, and create a new authentic way of being. Incorporating healthier boundaries into your life is a process of reparenting yourself and acknowledging this inner child. By doing so, you can break free from people-pleasing patterns and create more authentic relationships. Connecting with your inner child involves engaging in activities that nurture your playful and creative side. Recognize the difference between your inner critic and inner voice, allowing yourself to be kinder and more compassionate towards yourself. Forgiveness is a crucial aspect of embracing healthy boundaries. Acknowledge that parents are fallible and that your past does not define you. Saying no and setting boundaries is an act of self-care, not selfishness. It allows you to grow, make better decisions, and develop more meaningful relationships. Troubleshoot challenges that may arise, and remember that boundaries are about expressing love, trust, care, and respect for yourself and others. Reparenting yourself also involves acknowledging your past mistakes without self-blame and granting yourself the grace to heal and grow. Embrace the freedoms that boundaries bring, enabling you to form healthier, more authentic connections with others. Recognize when a relationship may not be healthy for you, and be willing to let go if needed. Ultimately, boundaries are a reflection of who you are and a way to express self-love and self-respect. To make authentic decisions and protect our well-being, we must recognize when to say no and decipher our genuine desires. Often, we've been conditioned to prioritize others' needs over our own, leading to inner conflict. To bridge the gap between obligations and desires, pay attention to how you feel when considering a request. A genuine desire feels different from an obligation. It's essential to trust your intuition and set boundaries. Saying yes out of guilt or obligation leads to resentment. Embrace enthusiastic consent, even if it's a moderate yes. Make decisions based on what you genuinely want, not to please others. Avoid people-pleasing habits and honor your feelings to foster healthier relationships. Communicate your desires and boundaries respectfully. Remember, doing things out of obligation undermines your sense of agency and keeps you stuck in the past. Say yes with authenticity or confidently say no to preserve your well-being and empower yourself as a grown-up. To ensure your decisions align with your genuine desires, examine your motives. Ask yourself if you would still want to do something if you didn't receive the expected response or reward. If not, revise your motivations to reflect authentic desire or communicate your expectations clearly. Avoid guilt-driven actions or obligations that lead to resentment. Embrace the power of pausing before responding to requests, giving yourself time to consider your feelings and needs. Remember, saying no doesn't make you selfish. It's essential to set healthy boundaries and preserve your well-being. Saying yes without genuine desire is not true giving, it's self-harm. Embrace assertiveness and communicate your boundaries respectfully to avoid people guilting you into things. Recognize that not all obligations are genuine, and it's okay to prioritize yourself when needed. Ultimately, it's about finding a balance between genuine desires and life's unavoidable responsibilities. Take time to understand your bandwidth and intentions and learn to distinguish between pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and ignoring your needs. Overcome guilt by acknowledging that prioritizing yourself is essential and a journey of growth. Learn to say no to unfair and unreasonable requests, respecting yourself and others' boundaries. She also says, reduce hinting and be more direct in your communication. People-pleasing often involves dropping hints or using passive-aggressive behavior to get what we want without being assertive. This only creates confusion and unmet expectations. Embrace clear and compassionate communication by setting boundaries and saying no when necessary. There are 2 types of no, hard and soft. Use a hard no when clarity and conciseness are required, and a soft no with people who respect your boundaries but might need some detail. Being intentional with your no's helps build healthier relationships and avoids unnecessary stress. Using the phrase, "What did you mean by that?" is an assertive way to gain clarity in situations where you feel uncomfortable or uncertain. Repeating what someone said or describing their behavior helps them see reality and fosters intimacy in relationships. When dealing with tricky people, stick to facts and avoid emotional appeals. Use the broken record strategy to persistently and calmly communicate your boundaries. Embrace healthy boundaries by having realistic expectations and not denying your true feelings. Troubleshoot saying no by being honest and direct, without waiting for full readiness. Addressing uncomfortable topics with empathy helps resolve conflicts and fosters intimacy. Remember, being more direct may invite some conflict, but it also prevents internal struggles and invites healthier relationships. Many assume that personal growth or setting boundaries will lead to a smooth, happy life. However, the author's journey of self-discovery, overcoming people-pleasing, and embracing boundaries has been filled with ups and downs. Challenges like motherhood, self-employment, and personal relationships have tested her to the limit. Eruptions and trials have forced her to confront her fears and weaknesses, but they have also taught her valuable lessons about resilience, vulnerability, and the importance of feeling to heal. Embrace the journey and allow yourself time to recover and grow from life's inevitable challenges. Challenges are opportunities to level up your boundaries and take care of yourself, but as a recovering people-pleaser, you may struggle with self-criticism when they arise. Embrace your feelings and take time to heal and grow. Don't bypass your emotions by immediately trying to find the silver lining in challenges. It's okay to be pissed off and experience the full range of feelings. Recognize challenges as indicators of flaws in thinking or actions and use them to help you grow. Set boundaries and make adjustments to communicate them effectively. Troubleshoot common issues in setting boundaries, like feeling overwhelmed by emotions or facing pushback from others. Remember, saying no and having boundaries are successes, and it's okay to feel upset about past mistakes as long as you use them to move forward with healthier boundaries. If someone reacts poorly to your no, it's a sign that your boundary was necessary and overdue. Before our next book, here are Dr. Lienna Wilson, a clinical psychologist with a practice in Princeton, New Jersey, Transformative coach Myra Mchale, and parenting teenagers expert and psychologist Angela Karanja on their views.
Boundaries are like invisible borders around you that are meant to protect your interests and well-being. These borders apply to all of the relationships around you, whether they're family, platonic, romantic, or professional. Boundaries are a form of self-care, and they highlight and explain our rules for how we deserve to be treated so that we feel safe and respected. To set boundaries, you need to identify what you want and need, and then assertively communicate your needs. Most people want to be liked, so it can be difficult to say no for fear of being disliked. So it is important to learn to say no when a request will interfere with your self-care or well-being. If you are concerned about damaging the relationship, you can always offer an alternative that will work for you.
One word, one little word with 2 letters, but it's a very powerful word.
Because when people are nice, when people are considerate, when people are able to love others, they find it very hard to say no to them, particularly their loved ones. They can end up acting as unpaid slaves. So although this is done from a place of love, for others it's not done from a place of self-love, because we need to respect our own boundaries. We need to say no sometimes because it's not the right thing for us. So that means putting yourself at the top of your agenda. And that doesn't come easy for a lot of people. So it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing practice. My advice to you is learn to say no when it's appropriate, and do not beat yourself up about it either.
Most people struggle to say no. In fact, a lot of people don't even know that no is a complete sentence that does not require an explanation. Here are 3 reasons why people have challenges saying no. 1, the fear of being judged. People may fear being rejected by someone because they've said no, or they fear being viewed as rude or selfish. Number 2, fear of conflict. Fear of disappointing or upsetting someone creates internal conflict, thus the inability to say no. Number 3 is low self-esteem. A lot of people struggle to say no because they lack that self-confidence and don't feel like they are worthy of saying no. As you can see, all these 3 reasons stem from fear, and they are all trauma responses. They stem from the person's past experiences and relationships and environment, which can lead to a person feeling powerless and unable to assert themselves. Remember, no is a complete sentence.
Our final book is Set Boundaries, Find Peace, a guide to reclaiming yourself by Nedra Tawwab, who is a licensed therapist and relationship guru with over 12 years' experience helping people to resolve their relationship issues. She operates on the philosophy that the root cause of most relationship problems is unhealthy boundaries. Here she is speaking to the Psychology podcast.
I think a boundary is a verbal or behavioral statement that you make to feel comfortable, safe, and protected in your relationships with others. Typically, we think of boundaries as just verbal, and really, when I say verbal, telling people what to do, right? So we think of that as boundaries, but it's so much more than that. It can also be changing our behaviors in relationships. And sometimes it is asking other people to change their behaviors. And it's also saying no. So it's so many things. And I think when we think of that word, we think of these tough walls and always saying no. And that is just a smidget of what a boundary is and not the totality of what healthy boundaries are. I think of enmeshment as walking alongside someone. I meant walking intertwined with someone, and being separate as walking alongside them. So we can go our separate ways, we can come back together. But when we are intertwined with people, what we do is dependent on what they do. How we feel is dependent on how they feel. And so there is no separateness in each other. It's really, we are the same person. And if we are not being the same, there is a problem. When in relationships, we are different. We have, different TV preferences from our partners sometimes. With our friends, we don't all have the same friend group. We have different jobs for people. So there are so many things about us that are different. And it doesn't mean that we need to be divided because of those differences, but maybe it's a part of the conversation. So if all of those things can be different and okay, so can some of our needs, so can some of our desires in relationships.
The book lays out everything you need to know about boundaries, what they are, why you need them, and how to implement them in your life right now. Healthy relationships need healthy boundaries. That's because, as diverse as these problems may seem, they actually all boil down to the same fundamental problem. You've allowed your needs to take second place to someone else's. Boundaries, then, are about standing up for yourself. Having healthy boundaries mean being able to count on the people in your life to treat you in a manner that you're comfortable with. When we think of boundaries, the one that first come to mind are the physical boundaries of our bodies and personal space. You've probably experienced how uncomfortable it can be when someone gets too close to your face, during a conversation, for example. But physical boundaries are actually just one of 6 types of boundaries. We have sexual, intellectual, and emotional boundaries, which are about having our opinions and feelings respected by others, even if they disagree with us. We also have material boundaries, which relate to how others use our possessions. And finally, we have time boundaries, which are about ensuring that others understand the value of our time. Admittedly, many of these boundaries are coded into the culture, like personal space, so it shouldn't be necessary to state them. However, other boundaries are more individual, and these are the ones we need to communicate. For example, when meeting someone for the first time, you might have to let them know that you're more of a handshaker than a hugger. Of course, setting boundaries isn't always easy. We worry that we'll be seen as stuffy, needy, or overly sensitive. We might even worry about harming the relationship by making things awkward. But in the long run, not setting boundaries is counterproductive. If we allow others to continually step on our boundaries, the quality of our relationships will inevitably decline. Most relationship problems are caused by boundaries that are either too porous or too rigid. Think of your boundaries like the membrane of a cell, a selective barrier that allows useful substances to pass through while blocking harmful ones. Just like a cell membrane, your boundaries should aim for that perfect balance between being receptive to positive influences and blocking negative ones. If you fail to achieve this balance, you're at risk of experiencing a range of relationship issues. If your boundaries are too porous, for instance, you'll be vulnerable to absorbing other people's needs and emotions as your own. However, if you err too far in the opposite direction, and your boundaries are too rigid, you're in danger of ending up emotionally isolated and alone. Porous boundaries are weak, overly flexible, or poorly expressed. They're usually characterized by a lack of emotional separation, dependency, or a people-pleasing attitude. At its most extreme, porous boundaries can result in emotional enmeshment and codependency. Enmeshment is what happens when there's a lack of clear distinction between the emotional lives of two people. For the clearest example of enmeshment, think of those couples who you never see apart because they spend every waking moment with one another. Codependency is similar to enmeshment, but it's more unbalanced. Codependent relationships take the form of one person dedicating their lives to solving all the other person's problems. This arrangement is generally bad for both parties, since one side never has their own needs met, and the other never learns how to solve their own problems. People who suffer from porous boundaries need to work on reclaiming their autonomy. The first step is to establish some physical and emotional distance. It's important to withdraw some of your support and focus on good self-care practices. On the other side of the spectrum, people who have rigid boundaries generally find it difficult to get close to people. The most pathological form of rigid boundaries is counterdependency, which is characterized by emotional distance and an inability to express vulnerability. An example of counterdependency is when you ghost a person that you've been dating simply because they opened up how much they like you. The solution for rigid boundaries is to practice cultivating close relationships. That means practicing expressing how you feel to others, asking for help when you need it, and allowing yourself to love. In the end, healthy boundaries are to be found somewhere in between porous and rigid boundaries. You'll have healthy boundaries once you combine a concern for your own needs with a concern for the needs of others. Setting healthy boundaries require clear communication and consistent action. If you think about it, passive aggressiveness is really just a poor attempt at communicating a boundary. Instead of directly stating how we've been hurt, we act out how we feel and just hope the other person figures out what they've done wrong. More often than not, though, this approach only frustrates the other person who is completely oblivious to what the problem is. Therefore, it's good practice to communicate your needs directly. The 2 steps to communicating a boundary directly are to assert it verbally and then back it up with action. Assertiveness is absolutely the way to go. Unlike passive aggressiveness, assertiveness is a way of communicating your needs openly without attacking the other for having done something wrong. And when you assert your boundaries directly, you minimize the chance that they'll be misunderstood. Assertive boundary statements usually take the form of I want, I need, or I expect. Try to avoid apologizing or explaining too much when you set boundaries. You don't want to give the impression that your boundaries are negotiable. The process of setting boundaries doesn't end with communication, however. You have to back up what you say with consistent action, or else your boundaries won't be taken seriously. For one, that means modeling behavior you expect from others. If you want your partner to be honest with you, for example, it's not going to help your cause if you're not honest with her. And secondly, consistent action means respecting other people's boundaries as well. Healthy relationships are built of mutuality. And if you don't honor other people's boundaries, you don't give them much reason to honor yours. Some people may resist your boundary by questioning it or testing your limits. Occasionally, people might even pretend they didn't hear you and ignore your boundary altogether. These responses are typically a sign that you need to reevaluate your relationship. That might mean simply reiterating your boundaries, but it might also be an indication that the relationship simply isn't working. If someone continues to infringe on your boundaries, you'll have to enforce your boundary by issuing a consequence. In some cases, you may decide it's better just to distance yourself from a relationship or end it entirely. How often you give your time to others is your choice. You're not obligated to give your time to people who don't respect you or who drain you of your energy. That doesn't necessarily mean you no longer care about this person. It just means you're looking out for your own well-being. Boundaries are also essential in how we treat ourselves. If you want to help others, a portion of your energy must go toward good care. One of the main reasons we avoid setting boundaries is that we misunderstand what they are. We imagine that boundaries are distancing ourselves emotionally from a person, and that genuine relationships are about selfless giving. As a result, we end up burning out. On the one hand, good self-boundaries prevent you from engaging in practices that don't serve you. But self-boundaries aren't just about saying no. They're also about saying yes to yourself by treating yourself with respect and adopting healthy self-care practices. The essence of true self-care is authenticity. It's about being in tune with your own needs and respecting yourself enough to fulfill them. An example of self-care is saying no to a request when you know you don't have the time to do it. When you say no to the things that you can't or don't want to do, you have more energy and more enthusiasm for the things you say yes to. Other self-care practices include finding the time to do things that you enjoy, improving yourself through learning and self-development, and spending time with people who make you feel good. So in the end, don't think of self-boundaries as being purely restrictive. Family is often where people struggle most when it comes to setting boundaries, especially the parent-child relationship. After all, these relationship dynamics are decades in the making and aren't likely to be changed overnight. But we must set boundaries with our parents because that's the only way we'll ever grow up. It's only by virtue of the fact that we set boundaries with our parents during our development that we gradually learned to become autonomously acting individuals. Those, however, who fail to assert boundaries in development will never truly cease to be a child. The first step to implementing boundaries with family members is to create distance. Physically, that means reducing how often you see them or speaking to them on the phone. Emotionally, creating distance involves preserving your privacy by withholding intimate details of your personal life. The next step is to practice asserting your will. The main way to do that is to start solving your own problems and making your own decisions. There are also other smaller ways you can win a bit of self-autonomy. For example, by expressing your opinions freely in front of them, even when it contradicts their views. It's important to remember that this advice also applies the other way around. If you're a parent, it's easy to forget that your children have boundaries too, and it's important to respect them, at least within reason. When a child sets a boundary, It might look like refusing to eat a certain food or crying around a certain person. Respecting your children's boundaries is important because it reinforces the positive habit of asserting oneself and relating to others in a healthy way. When you acknowledge a child's boundary, you are effectively saying to them, yes, you have the power to determine your own life, and yes, your needs and preferences matter. Ultimately, as counterintuitive as it may seem, creating boundaries between family members is actually essential for relating to each other in adulthood as equal independent beings. Setting boundaries in the office is also essential for enjoying your work and doing a good job. Even if we have healthy boundaries in our personal lives, we tend to have more porous boundaries in our professional lives. That's because we find it more difficult to set boundaries with our boss and team members out of fear of not being seen as a good employee. The first step to setting boundaries at work is to get over the idea that being a good employee means saying yes to every request. There's nothing good about overloading yourself so much that you do everything half-heartedly. Remember, when you say no to extra responsibilities, you're saying yes to doing a good job on the work you already have. The next step is to do what it takes to get your work done within working hours, so no one can guilt you into working longer. One way to achieve this is to practice delegating tasks when you have too much on your plate. Another strategy you can try is informing your co-workers that you prefer to save the chit-chat for your lunch break. If you still find that your workload is just too much to handle, then tell your boss. Of course, setting boundaries with your boss can be nerve-wracking, but it's far better to communicate your limits to your boss than to suffer in silence. And finally, setting romantic boundaries means clearly communicating your needs and your expectations for the future. When couples can't assert their boundaries explicitly, they end up resorting to other more conflict-prone methods of communication, such as passive-aggressiveness. By being honest and upfront about how you expect to be treated and what you want to get out of the relationship, you'll both be spared a great deal of heartache and wasted time in the long run. You'd be surprised just how many couples never discuss their expectations around things like marriage and having children until years into the relationship, only to discover that they want completely incompatible things. Other conflict-prone topics that should probably be dealt with early on include how you intend to share finances, how you'll divide up household responsibilities, and what your stance is on fidelity. That last conversation is sure to be interesting, at least. You may well find it uncomfortable, but uncomfortable conversations save relationships. Based on conflicts that have come up in the past, you should already have a pretty good idea where boundaries and expectations need to be discussed. So to sum up, Lue says in The Joy of Saying No that life will make you say no when you avoid it. Challenges and experiences, both wanted and unwanted, will prompt you to establish healthy boundaries. Embrace your feelings, recognize unconscious biases, and evolve by letting go of old patterns. Saying no and being authentic lead to a more joyful and fulfilling life. Be compassionate towards yourself as you navigate this journey. And remember, it's okay to say no and prioritize your well-being. Embrace being yourself and let others do the same. Say no with love, care, trust, and respect. Glover Tawwab says in Set Boundaries, Find Peace that many of the problems in your life, from work overload to domestic disputes, really boil down to a single issue, an inability to set healthy boundaries. And so by taking the time to work on this one issue, you can make improvements to your quality of life across the board. With that in mind, here's a napkin-sized summary of the steps you need to take. Step 1. Identify the areas in your relationships where you feel you need clearer boundaries. Step 2. Assert your needs to the person as confidently and straightforwardly as possible. Step 3. Deal maturely with whatever discomfort ensues from setting your boundary. Remember, it will only be awkward if you make it awkward. And Step 4. Back up your boundary if necessary by restating it or issuing a consequence. I've had to make difficult choices in my own life and have had difficult conversations to assert boundaries with loved ones, and even split for good with family members. It is probably one of the most challenging things to do as we see our people as a tribe, but for your own sanity, it's a necessity. Please join in on the conversation by following at How to Be 24/7 on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and subscribe on the podcast, which can be found via www.howtobe247.com. Please vote for us at the People's Choice Podcast Awards by July 31st. The link can be found on the website. Please do leave a review if you found this helpful and you want to be featured. Remember to check out our Patreon for exclusive unseen bonus material from every single interview, all for the price of a coffee. And we have plenty of amazing material on the website itself, including Friday Opinions and articles where we talk to industry professionals and authors on various different subjects, including mental health. Before we go, here are John Pabon, who is a sustainability author, consultant, and speaker, and Laura Tremaine, who is the host of the 10 Things to Tell You podcast and author of the Life Council. See you next week.
I've spent 2 decades in the business of saving our Earth, and the one thing I always remind people is that you can do anything, but you cannot do everything. Time, capacity, sanity, those are all finite resources. Now, as altruists, as people that care, there is plenty we can say yes to. We want to feed the homeless, we want to read to the elderly and take that dog home from the shelter. But we're only one person and we can only do so much. And probably by trying to do too much, we're not being as impactful as we think we are. So what I want you to do is really remember to find the one thing you're passionate about that you can say no to everything else for. That could be something that you have a passion for. It could be something that you have a special skill in. Or if you're financially well off, it's something you can contribute to. Those are all great ways of ensuring a more sustainable future. And maybe to help you get over the issue of saying no, I want you to remember that you're not alone. There are billions of other people who also want to save the planet, and they're picking up maybe where you're not able to. So be confident in the knowledge that by doing less, you're actually doing more.
There has been a lot of chatter and education in the last few years about setting boundaries in our relationships as a way to navigate difficult situations, as a path to self-care. And I understand why this is a popular topic. It can be healthy, it can give you a sense of empowerment over your own life. But in the Life Council, I argue that we've also boundaried ourselves into loneliness. When we have a lot of rules around our interactions and our social gatherings, we naturally end up with less interactions and social gatherings. It isn't powerful, it's isolating. While taking care of yourself, of course, I encourage women to say yes to friendship and just go to the dinner or the coffee or on the walk, even if it's not to your exact specifications. Answer the phone and the text and the invitation. It just might change your life.